Hello and welcome to the Acts of Parliament chart. So your on-campus friends and your hybrid friends have a virtual foldable with this information, and they needed to download, type in, and then resubmit, and they had to look up the answers in the book. So rather than give you that headache, I just decided to turn it into slides, and then you can just follow along with me, pause me as needed, and I'll give you all the information for free so you don't have to look up anything, and then you'll know that you have exactly the right information. So Acts of Parliament makes it sound very unexciting and boring, but this is actually the beginnings of the revolution in terms of action. And you all have heard of these, like the Stamp Act and the Boston Tea Party. These are the acts that caused those events. So you know some of this, you maybe just didn't know it was under this title. So I called it The Colonists Are About to Get Very Mad, because they are going to start being so mad that they take action, and collective action, which is going to be a big difference. Rather than one person getting mad, you have big groups of people getting mad, and then all 13 colonies end up coming together. So on your notebook, page 6, you will have a chart that you will make, and it will look like this. If you don't like looking at this yellow version, I also put a image of it in the folder for today, but you want it to take up all of page 6 in your notebook. The title is Acts of Parliament Chart, which I put across the top of my notebook page. I actually turned it sideways so that the spiral is on the top. Then I wrote Acts of Parliament Chart, and then you want to have a column for act. When was it passed? What did it do? How did colonists react? Did Parliament respond? And how? And then these are the 6 acts we're going to be talking about. So again, pause me as needed, but I'm going to go ahead and move forward. Okay, so Proclamation of 1763. So on your chart, this is the first box under Act, Proclamation of 1763. The little picture is showing you what we're talking about, and we talked about this last week. So there's this imaginary line drawn to the west of the 13 colonies, stating that Native American land is over here. You can see it's pale pink, and the colonists should not be crossing over the Appalachian Mountains. That's what this boundary roughly follows. Should not be crossing over into Native American lands. This did not go over well, and you'll see in the next slides. So when was it passed? This would be your next column over to the right of where you just were. 1763, obviously, it's called the Proclamation of 1763. What did it do? So it prohibited the colonists, prohibited means forbid or no, you can't, move west of the Appalachian Mountains. So stay out of that Native American land. And this wasn't really designed to be kind to the Native Americans. The British government did this to try to keep the colonists close to the shore, where they could get to them by boat and where they could have soldiers posted, to try to kind of keep them collected in one area, concentrated, so that when the British soldiers were there, they could more closely monitor them. How did colonists react? Obviously, they were not happy. They didn't like being told what to do by Britain anyway, but to tell somebody you can't move, you can't acquire more land, did not go over well. Did Parliament, and the whole time we're talking about Parliament, think of Britain. We're talking about Britain when we say that. The British government or the English government or the king. Those would all be synonymous. How did they, or did they respond, and how? The answer is yes, and the king sent 10,000 troops to enforce. And these are going to be called redcoats and some other sort of nicknames, but keep remembering that British is going to be the red uniforms, and eventually the colonists are going to have blue uniforms. So redcoats are the British. In this case, the not liked group. So the next one is the Sugar Act. And this little picture just says that King George passed the Sugar Act on April 5th, 1764, and it made the colonists angry and they're protesting. So when was it passed? 1764. What did it do? It lowered tax on molasses. And you're thinking, well, if it lowered a tax, why are people mad? And to give you a little backstory, the colonists were smuggling goods. They were sneaking them in so they didn't have to pay taxes on them. And then if they got caught, they had to pay court costs and a bunch of heavy fines. And it was more expensive, obviously, if you got busted. So the British had this idea, okay, let's lower the tax on molasses, which is used as a sweetener, as a sugar, to try to stop smuggling. So to pay the tax on molasses would still be cheaper than getting caught for smuggling. So the English, the British were hoping to kind of get the colonists to stop smuggling, go ahead and pay the tax, keep it all legal, And that way, England still gets their tax money, and the colonists, in theory, stay out of court and stay out of trouble. But it also allowed the officers to take smuggled goods without trial. So if you got busted with smuggled molasses or whatever you were trying to sneak in without paying taxes, the officers could just take all your stuff, your whole cart full of molasses, without giving you a trial. And maybe you had it legally, but this opens a very big gray area for British officers to take people's items and say, oh, they were smuggled, like I had to take them. So this starts to cause even more distrust. How did the colonists react? They were angry and they felt their rights were being violated. Did Parliament respond? Not really on this one. I mean, they're always responding, but it's not going to show up until the next act. So we'll just leave this one at no. The next act is the Stamp Act. And I love this stamp. It's something that had to go on all paper products, decks of cards, newspapers, wills. I mean, if you think of everything that has paper in your life, you would have had to pay a tax on that. And the way that you proved that it was a legal paper that had in fact had taxes paid on it was to have a stamp on it. And this is an example of one of those stamps. When was it passed? 1765. What did it do? So again, taxed all printed material, newspapers, cards, wills, had to have a stamp to show the tax was paid. How did colonists react? The colonists were outraged, and you notice the language gets stronger here. Before we said angry, now they're like full on mad, outraged. The Virginia House of Burgesses, remember that's one of the colonists' forms of government that they had. They passed a resolution that only they could tax themselves. Samuel Adams starts the Sons of Liberty to protest, and people boycott. So they stop buying British paper. They try to sort of limit their use of paper in general in order to show that they're angry and to not pay the tax. Did Parliament respond and how? The answer is yes. March 1776, Congress repealed the Stamp Act, which means they took it back. Okay, colonists, calm down. You don't have to pay the Stamp Act anymore. But then they went ahead and passed a new act called the Declaratory Act, which said it can tax colonists for anything, for even more things. So the repeal was replaced by something worse. So in no way was that what the colonists wanted. The Townshend Acts. So this is going to be even more taxes, and you can see in this little drawing that now we're taxing glass and tea and paint and pencils and paper, and I mean just so many more things. That's going to, of course, make the colonists even more angry. And keep in mind that all these taxes that England is imposing, the reason they're doing that is to pay for all the war debt, right, that was started by the French and Indian War. And remember that Britain also had other conflicts going on in Europe. So this is all to pay for those wars and those costly military ventures. And the colonists felt like they were so far removed from that they shouldn't have to pay for it. When was it passed? 1767. What did it do? It taxed all imported goods. Remember, importing is anything the colonists are getting coming into the colonies. So anything that's coming over by boat, which is everything that you see on this list. So glass, tea, paper, fabric, different kind of tax because it had to be paid before the goods arrived in the colonies. So England keeps trying little fine-tuning differences to see if that will sort of calm the colonists down. So in this case, before, so on the Stamp and the Sugar Act, let's say, the tax was very obvious because even when that piece of whatever that box of tea was in the store, then the person who is the store owner, right? You go up to pay for the tea and they say, oh, this is 10 shillings, but, well, I guess 10 shillings is a lot. Let's say it's 2 shillings, but it's really going to be 3 shillings because of the tax. You could actually feel the tax that you were paying. With the Townshend Acts, they taxed the goods before they arrived in the colonies. So when the ship arrived, whoever was purchasing all the products off the ship, they paid the taxes at that point, and then they just passed along to the customer. So in the Townshend Acts, if you go in to buy that same box of tea, it would just automatically say 3 shillings. It wouldn't have the added that you would actually see type of tax, but of course you were still paying it. And the colonists figured this out very quickly and they were not at all fooled. How did they react? Again, to boycott. And this is really a very strong move if everybody does it, right? If everybody in Boston or if everybody in Virginia decides to stop buying something, the company is really going to feel that. And that's the whole point of a boycott, to really hurt the company that's doing it. So they wanted to encourage women, who were, of course, the clothes makers, to use homemade fabric, don't buy British, and a women's group starts called the Daughters of Liberty, kind of like the Sons of Liberty. Did Parliament respond and how? Yes. In 1768, more troops are sent, and this time specifically to Boston. The Tea Act. So big tea drinkers at this time in the colonies, sort of on par to how much coffee Americans drink now. When was it passed? 1773 in April. What did it do? It took control of the tea market and removed some taxes to encourage colonists to buy. So you're thinking, okay, again, they're lowering the taxes or removing some of the taxes, so that should make the colonists happy, but they weren't. At this point, they were so fed up that any taxes were going to make them mad. And if you look at the part that says took control over the tea market, that means Britain was only allowing there to be one type of tea, and that was the British imported tea. And the colonists did not like having no choices. How did they react? Of course, they're still mad. They don't want any taxes, didn't want to be told what tea they could buy, so they boycott the ships coming in. So they stop buying tea, first of all, and then they end up dumping it, which is called the Boston Tea Party, which we will get to. Did Parliament respond and how? Yes. So Congress now passes this kind of a bundle of acts called the Coercive Acts. And the colonists are going to nickname them the Intolerable Acts because it's just too much. Some of the intolerable acts include the number 4 is the one that you're going to be most familiar with, the Quartering Act. So this has nothing to do with quarters like money. Quartering means to live, to force soldiers to live with a colonist. So the Quartering Act stated that anytime a, quote, redcoat or a British soldier would need a place to stay, because they don't really have military barracks set up in the colonies, so the colonists were supposed to allow these strange men into their homes to sleep and feed them and care for them when they were in their town, which of course the colonists did not like at all. When was it passed? 1774. What did it do? It meant to punish the colonists, let soldiers live in houses. It also stated there could be no more town hall meetings, and the colonists had to pay for the ruined tea, specifically the Bostonians. How did they react? The colonists are mad, and shockingly, they team up. So England was kind of hoping to keep the 13 colonies sort of independent of each other and not at all on the same side, but the colonists start to help each other out. So the colonists living in the other colonies other than Massachusetts start to hear about all this stuff happening in Boston, and they send food and they send materials to help the people in Boston. So this was something that Britain was not expecting. Did they respond and how? I just put very nervous because tomorrow's lesson is going to go into more detail. What's about to happen is the Boston Massacre. So that's what we'll talk about tomorrow. So your whole chart should be filled out. Make sure you go back and rewatch any sections that you need to, but you should have a completely filled out Acts of Parliament chart, which will come in very handy on future tests and puzzle pieces. Okay, have a great day.